Welcome to Blue Line Lore. I'm your host, Cobalt Blue. You can just call me Cobalt. I invite you to join me as I conduct interviews, analyze data, and dissect media on a variety of topics concerning American law enforcement and the ever-evolving society that we are tasked to defend. My hope is that thoughtful, earnest discussion of these topics will better equip us all to form a more perfect union within these great United States of America. Please get comfortable and lend ear as I compare and contrast the dilemmas faced by law enforcement in fiction and reality. These are the legends of Blue Line Lore. Hello, viewers and listeners. Thanks for tuning in to the pilot episode of the Legends of Blue Line Lore. Whether I'm dissecting a novel, a graphic novel, a song, a film, a streaming series, or some form of interactive media such as a computer game, yes, I will talk about Disco Elysium at some point, you can always count on coverage of our folks in blue within the world of fiction when you tune into Legends. But that will probably be the only common thread for this series. While the Chronicles episodes are set to follow a fairly rigid structure, especially when it comes to the interviews that will likely form the bulk of content on this channel, Legends episodes eschew any hard rules beyond discussing fiction that is at least distantly related to policing. Eschewing rules, and authority in general, by the way, is what the eponymous main character of Netflix's Nimona does best. So it makes all too much sense to talk about this delightful movie for all ages in this first episode. Now there's already a treasure trove of video essays that analyze the themes of this film here on YouTube, and they're more than worth the viewing time. But while content creators have covered the film and graphic novels commentary on law enforcement as an institution in the modern world, none have done so from the perspective of law enforcement personnel. I think it's only fair that someone who has worked in a law enforcement institution that did involve some heroics, and is proud of that work, lend a voice to this discussion, even if I'm late to the party. The purpose of this video essay is twofold. Primarily, I think more people of all ages should watch this movie because it's a simple, joyful, and fulfilling experience. Secondly, I would like people who have already seen the film to take in what I have to say about it, as it might enrich your impression of it and other media moving forward. But before I dive in, a quick content warning for peace officers and our families who are watching. The film and this video will showcase some fantasy violence and ideations of self-harm. Also, Nimona the movie expresses some criticism of law enforcement as an institution, even as Ballister and Ambrosius are portrayed as righteous men with good, if misguided, intentions throughout the story, in the film at least. If for any reason you are in a headspace wherein critique of our taxing profession may have you feeling some kind of way, feel free to hold off on watching this video and Nimona until you're in a better place mentally. Like always, there will be contact information for mental health resources at the end of this video in case somebody needs it. With that said, in spite of my disagreement with Nimona's message of law enforcement as an institution being a net negative, I fervently recommend this highly entertaining film for the whole family. The adults at Blue Line Lore found it delightful, and had no qualms with the notion of their kids viewing it. Although particularly sensitive viewers may be frightened by the mild fantasy violence, to be specific about said violence, it's mostly just cartoon punching and kicking that you'd see on a Saturday morning cartoon back in the day. As a caveat, there is one particular scene that we'll cover in the next section, featuring a death and dismemberment within a couple seconds of each other. But again, the violence is portrayed in a way that is consistent with the film's PG rating. Two final notes that parents might want to know. There are some mildly suggestive jokes that I am positive will go over the heads of young children. And the only physical romance consists of a few cuddles and one chaste kiss at the end that lasts a fraction as long as the ending embrace of the very G-rated Singin' in the Rain. Sidebar: Gene Kelly was a better dancer than Fred Astaire, and this is not open for debate. The original graphic novel, which before that was a web series, has language and violence more in line with a PG-13 film despite its approachable art style. And I'll make a point to highlight other differences between the movie and the graphic novel throughout this video. For now, I think it's well past time I finally talk about this movie. Let's talk about Nimona. Well, I suppose I'll let Nimona start us off.
A long, long time ago, a kingdom lived in peace. But lurking in the shadows was a great and terrible evil. The monster attacked without warning. But in that darkest hour, a hero rose up. Her name was Glorith.
Go back to the shadows from whence you came!
And the archetypal beginning to a fantasy movie if there ever was one. But there's nothing wrong with that when the presentation is as striking as the one we get here. At any rate, Glorith saves her kingdom and founds Ye Old Police Academy, or Knight Academy, swears in some knights, and charges the descendants of said knights to defend the kingdom from all threats foreign and domestic for all time. 1,000 years pass, and we get to the present day within the film. If you are interested in watching the film, be advised that the rest of this video essay is spoilers all the way down. If you want to go in blind, and some people like to do that, even with media meant for all ages, I recommend you watch the rest of this video after you've seen the movie. The story goes like this. Knighthood has been something one is born into since Glorth set the precedent for it. But a young commoner named Ballister Boldheart shows such zealous determination to become a knight that the Queen allows the young patriot to try his hand at the training and subsequent lifelong commitment of knighthood. He graduates from the academy at the head of his class, amid mixed levels of acceptance from his peers of noble bloodlines, and we join him and his classmate, Ambrosius, on the night of their highly publicized graduation.
I'm thinking. This is my thinking phase.
Hey, thinky face, look at me. You were better and worked harder than all of us. You're gonna be a knight, Bal.
We then enter the locker room with them, as the new knights get suited up for what veterans and first responders know will be a thorough uniform inspection before graduation by their director, who we would call a chief of police. One of their fellow graduates, Todd, makes it clear that not everyone in their class sees Boldheart as an equal, despite him leading the way throughout their academy. When Todd cracks a joke at Ballister's expense, some of the other graduates laugh along with him. Todd is a jerk. Cut to the main event. Despite the controversy of a commoner being knighted, the ceremony seems to be going on as normal, with extravagant fanfare that is framed as typical for a Knight Academy graduation. And what a graduation! No marching required, and the whole kingdom is cheering them on for their big day. Ambrosius, being a direct descendant of Glorth herself, soaks up the fanfare as the crowd goes crazy over his knighting. Then Ballister is knighted, and given the command to rise by his head of state who put so much faith in him, seemingly at some risk to her political standing. After an uncertain silence, the populace is on their feet in celebration of the common man whose peerless grit and patriotism made him a hero. But then, something goes awry. The pommel of Ballister's ceremonial sword discharges a regicidal laser, slaying his lifelong benefactor where she stands. A setup for the ages. Ballister can't believe what he's seeing, nor can anyone in the entire kingdom. The world freezes. Ambrosius snaps out of it, and, justifiably, deploys his service weapon to pacify the assassination weapon and the evident assassin who's wielding it. But it's just too late. His head of state falls dead. His class leader, and beloved confidant, is dismembered by his own action. Both the reaction time and restraint of Glorth's scion are commendable. He did his best to save a life without taking one. But no one worthy of the badge ever deploys lethal force and walks away without a few layers of negative or at least mixed emotions, even though it is done to prevent further harm, even when the suspects themselves survive. Can you imagine the grief that would come with using it against someone you love? These knight swords seem to have a cauterizing effect. Ballister isn't bleeding out. He is able to evade capture, but his life's labor has been foiled by an unknown antagonist, framed for high treason, and with all his friends and family convinced that he murdered the Queen, Ballister Boldheart goes into hiding. But off in some alleyway, somewhere on the other side of the kingdom, someone very special decides to come to his aid. Fast forward for what seems like a week or so tops. The exiled rookie wastes no time. He forges a completely prehensile prosthetic arm and gets to work figuring out exactly who framed him for regicide. A knock at the door interrupts his caper, and that's when he meets Nimona. Nimona is unlike anyone Ballister has ever met. She has no buy-in to the kingdom nor any love of country. She can zip herself around a room at blinding speed and even change her shape at will. We learn throughout the story that, at least in the movie version of this tale, no one really goes outside the kingdom's walls, knights included, so few if any citizens actually know what lies beyond their borders. Nimona doesn't match the description of anyone or anything that anyone in the kingdom has ever seen, at least in contemporary times. But Nimona wants to help Ballister as his self-proclaimed sidekick, and a disgraced knight with no other connections is hardly in a position to be selective. So they shake on it. The rest of the movie follows, hijinks ensue, and the simple mystery is unraveled at an even pace. Motivations and all. As the title of the film suggests, Nimona takes the handle in most of the action sequences. Hints about her backstory are drip-fed to Ballister and the audience, some hints more true than others. Meanwhile, Ambrosius wrestles with his grief over what he had to do to Ballister while simultaneously tracking him as a wanted fugitive. Todd keeps being a punk who really needs to review his escalation of force chart as of one particular scene, and somewhere in the middle of it all, The director is revealed to have set up Ballister and murdered their monarch. The stage is set for the third act revelation and obligatory action climax, but my coverage thereof will be made better if I first take the time to discuss the individual characters as they relate to law enforcement. This will also be a good time to contrast them with their graphic novel progenitors, as there are important differences. Nimona in the film represents counterculture to law and order, particularly if those laws bring about an order wherein some people are made to be have-nots through no fault of their own. Most people in the kingdom seem to be happy, but at the very least Nimona herself has been pushed outside the margins of society just for being different, just for being Nimona. That is not okay, and I assert that Nimona does not deserve that treatment, even if she and I have very different ideas about how to best improve a society. In order to summarize the part of her ideology that I disagree with, even though it's never said aloud in the film, I'll move us along to Terminology Check 3, ACAB, an acronym that stands for All Cops Are Bad, although I know the word bad can be replaced by a different two-syllable word with more offensive connotations. I am keeping it PG for this review, please don't correct me in the comments. ACAB is both an acronym and statement, but how literally the statement is to be taken depends on who you ask. When one looks into it, one finds that, despite using the word all, the acronym is supposedly meant to indicate that the institution of law enforcement is bad by nature, although any person who works for it can be judged individually outside of their profession. However, according to the acronym's ideology, the institution of law enforcement is inherently harmful as a whole, so therefore, even the most benevolent person, who does nothing but help people through the profession of policing, is still bad by virtue of perpetuating the career field from the time this benefactor puts on the uniform until the moment it is doffed. Of course, the obvious criticism is that adherents of this idea should come up with a better acronym to describe institution bad, people good or bad. Seriously, come up with a better one. But we'll go with that working definition for what I'm about to say about Nimona as a symbol and character. Nimona almost personifies a platonic ideal of ACAB when interpreted as a dig at institutions more than people. She certainly has a chip on her shoulder when it comes to any idea of authority, and she has no love for the kingdom she resides in. But on an interpersonal level, she is perfectly civil with both Ballister and Ambrosius, even when the latter is actively antagonistic to her cause.
Come on, man. Do the right thing.
I'm not saying Nimona doesn't have a few quotes and sketches that are explicitly homicidal.
Then let's go get 'em.
If you see anyone,
Murder 'em.
start talking.
We start stabbing.
No stabbing.
This is just a bunch of drawings. Very disturbing drawings. Oh, look, it's me. On a rhinoceros, skewering several guards like a human kebab.
Yeah, do you like it?
No, we're doing things my way this time. No one gets hurt.
Oh, I was going for the hurting people version.
We just
But are you disappointed that I'm not a murderer?
I mean, a little.
But she never hurts anyone without a purpose throughout the entire movie, and until the action climax, she never kills a single person. I am of the opinion that she never has before meeting Ballister. Now, the Nimona in the graphic novel is a different story. She's very eager to act on her sadistic impulses, drawing blood and stacking bodies without remorse except when Ballister reins her in. But as for the film, she is an idealized countercultural icon, capable of restraint even while explicitly tearing down society, if not the people who inhabit it, just to watch it all burn. Much like in reality, though, people who act like that beyond their teenage years rarely do so just to chase a trend. Nimona's been hurt, and while no individual knight, other than Todd and the director, have personally acted against her out of malice, the government in the film is misguided in their treatment of people like Nimona, to the point that her desire for its destruction is understandable, whether or not someone believes that it's justified. Now, in the framing of the movie, she has to be right. It's her film, after all. But in the graphic novel, it's more ambiguous, which will be a running theme throughout this character analysis. Aside from all this, what I personally like about her is just how much fun her character is. Her voice actress kills her lines, and while she is having fun, the audience can't help but have fun too. And when she hurts, the viewers hurt with her. She's also not the only shapeshifter on screen right now. Like Nimona, what you see on screen is simply the form that I, Cobalt Blue, choose to take on while I coalesce in the introduction of every video. Also like Nimona, if someone asks me what my true form is, I can answer in good faith that it's this one. As you might have noticed, I am also experimenting with exactly how I want my voice to sound when I interact with the real world. Feel free to give feedback in the comments. Please know that while she and I can both take on monstrous appearances and possess knowledge that would frighten most people, at the end of the day, I am still Cobalt in whatever shape I manifest, and she is still Nimona. Let's move on to Ballister. Alistair, like Nimona, personifies counterculture just by being who he is. Not a magical shapeshifter, but a commoner in shiny armor. He's also an interesting foil to Nimona in the film because his knighthood makes him a symbol of both his government and systemic reform, if not abolition of said system. At least not until the end. His buy-in to his society is framed as naive and a net negative, again within the context of this fictional world. But his ideology is never shown to be malicious or evil, or without some level of justification, given that things were going his way until about a week ago. He shows restraint when battling the Knights of the Institution, never killing anyone, or doing more damage than necessary to incapacitate them. Collateral damage and excessive force just aren't options for him, much like most of his helmeted antagonists. Again, the film does not portray the Knights as sadists, with two exceptions. This is not entirely true for his comic equivalent. Alistair Blackheart, as he is known in the comic, is a self-proclaimed supervillain. He leans into the mad scientist bit much harder than Boltheart, scheming to kidnap his head of state and even using bioterrorism as a false flag operation against the institution of law enforcement and heroics, which he used to be a part of. His hand is forced and he kills an officer in the comic, but the framing makes it clear that this was his last resort to protect Nimona in this particular confrontation. One thing I do wish carried from Blackheart into Boldheart is the inquisitive, analytical nature of the former. Blackheart asks the eponymous heroine a lot more questions about her shapeshifting, and is less frightened than fascinated by her answers. Boldheart is, ironically, more timid around Nimona, and anything else he doesn't understand. This is in part because Blackheart lives in a kingdom that is not isolationist, and the world outside is referenced by him multiple times to include the existence of shapeshifters. At any rate, Ballister's chemistry with the protagonist in both versions is a joy to witness, and their banter makes it very easy to like them both, regardless of whose ideology you most closely identify with in the film. While I do enjoy Blackheart's scientific mind, I also really appreciate the contrast between Boldheart's timid and naive nature and his ability to cause tremendous harm when necessary. Too often, gentle people are portrayed in media as simply incapable of using force to change the world around them for the better. Ballister is not as powerful as Nimona, but as far as humans go, he's possibly the toughest guy you'll see on screen, more than able to remind the audience why he graduated top of his academy class. As a gentle, synthetic person, I appreciate the relatability he garners with me in this regard. By the end of the film, he may not take this as a compliment, but I think he's a high-speed cop and I'd be happy to share a patrol car with him. But let's go ahead and talk about another squared-away knight in the kingdom. The comedically named
Ambrosius Goldenloin,
whose surname I could not say without laughing if I were a human, is a different foil to Ballister in that he continues to serve the public trust through the institution, while his banished paramour battles against the state while still keeping public service in mind. As far as Ambrosius knows for most of the movie's runtime, Ballister slew his queen right before his eyes, and I assert that Ambrosius reacted how any great public servant would have. He neutralized the threat as swiftly as possible, concurrently seizing the opportunity to spare the assassin's life if such an opportunity manifested, as it did in this case. Great reaction. His internal conflict throughout the film was, in my opinion, more interesting than Ballister's, even when given less screen time. I don't really have a lot of bad to say about him other than that he happens to draw the wrong conclusions when misled by someone he trusts. He's assertive when he needs to be, cares about his partners on the force, and has great rapport with the people in his jurisdiction, even if some of that admiration was handed to him at birth. Now, Ambrosius in the comic is insufferable by design, and the comic's author Indy Stevenson designed him very well to that end. He's self-absorbed, cares less about the lives of his men than his toxic interactions with Ballister Blackheart, intentionally lets said supervillain escape after a bunch of people die in a lab explosion, and I won't show you the offending panel, but his motivation for literally disarming Blackheart on the page is reprehensible. Also, graphic novel Ambrosius gets in a bar fight with Blackheart, whereas the film Ambrosius just has a heated discussion with Boldheart like a sane person. In case you didn't know, domestic violence is not a love language. The romantic subplot is present in both versions, but let me ask you peace officers and Leo's spouses watching right now, which do we as law enforcement culture need more of in media right now? Yet another exaggerated portrayal of the very worst of toxic relationships that some of our peers get into, especially when the relationships involve two people working in public safety, or an aspirational yet believable love story that endures through the director's manipulations and the upheaval of their society's worst traditions. We know that there are deep wounds in Blue Line culture, and if we forget for a split second there are some very loud people who are happy to remind us of them, I think more cop shows could do with showing peace officers leaving out idyllic yet attainable trysts and even marriages. We all may know somebody on the force who is divorced, but to our credit, I bet everyone watching can also name some happy households that have one or more person wearing a badge. That's what I appreciate so much about Ambrosius, beyond his character arc that is sold with phenomenal voice acting. When it's all said and done, he and Ballister have a healthy relationship. I invite you to appreciate it too when you watch Nimona. But yes, Comic Ambrosius is a jerk. How about we move on to a bigger jerk? The unnamed director is the ultimate antagonist in both narratives. She is a radical traditionalist who is not above deception or even hurting innocent people in order to maintain the status quo.
I'm innocent, and I have proof.
He's got a weapon!
The status quo seems to be framed as a much happier one in the film than the comic. But even in this version, she's willing to shoot a giant magic cannon at civilians when she's convinced that action will maintain order. Mind you, that order has placed her in a cushy position. She's far more insidious with her evil in the comic, detaining the free press and torturing Nimona to further her ends. But movie director is still a bad person. I say person because neither story confirms her humanity beyond a reasonable doubt. But much like Nimona and myself, that doesn't mean her personhood is in question. Her quality of character, however, is undeniably vile. Not much good to say about her, although her actress crushed it like the rest of the cast. The director's adherence to tradition, position at the head of a fantasy public safety office, and frenzied mistrust of magical people reminds me a lot of Meredith Standard from Dragon Age 2, not to be mistaken with Meredith Blitzmeyer in the Nimona comic, who was sadly cut for the film. But back to Dragon Age 2. If anyone has completed that game, you know that covering its action climax in a post-2020 world has to be done delicately, so don't expect me to review that until at least Season 3 of this channel. At any rate, the director serves her purpose as a stand-in for those who would choose to viciously defend the status quo against any reform, no matter how small, and no matter how much good such a small change, like allowing a qualified commoner to serve as a knight, may be for her community. If she could think about the new recruits with a clear mind for even a second, she'd recognize that Ballister is 10 times the knight, and 10 times the man that Todd will ever be. Now, Todd has a lookalike in the graphic novel, who is also a mean-spirited man with no business being a knight. But I still think he's a unique character in the film, who mixed most of Comic Ambrosius' worst qualities and the worst haircut you'll see in the movie. He's a bully and a coward, and a good stand-in for the second worst possible partner one could have in the streets, the courts, or custody. Granted, the worst kind of person in public safety is more akin to the director, one who holds a position of administrative power and uses it to harm people. But the Todds of the world who run their mouths at a suspect to cause a fight that didn't need to happen, insult inmates and wonder why their partner gets jumped next shift, or get into extra-legal activities on or off duty will always understandably produce the more volatile public outcry.
I'm innocent, and I have proof.
He's got a weapon!
No, not anymore! Todd rules!
He's played for laughs in the film for the most part, but let me be crystal clear when I say that people like him have no business wearing a badge, no matter how high their test scores might be in Academy. This is made obvious when he finally catches Ballister and smiles while he puts the hurt on him. It is jarring and almost disturbing to see the grin on his face before striking his former classmate. He's enjoying the fight a little too much. And while I get that Ballister is an armed and very capable suspect for high treason, I certainly hope his training officer will have a long talk with him after this. At any rate, Todd's blunt sadism is a stark yet still PG-friendly portrayal of police brutality, and I appreciate the delicacy with which the otherwise lighthearted film addresses such a serious real-world issue. For those who don't know, there's no love for goons like Todd among those who deserve to hold the thin blue line. Other than the brass who act like the director, there is no greater Blue Falcon than the partner who causes undue harm and forces us to intervene and or report their misanthropy later. You know what? Terminology check 4. Blue Falcon. This is a phrase most often used by law enforcement. The phrase Blue Falcon is a code for Buddy Foiler, although it doesn't mean foiler. Use your imagination. A Blue Falcon is a bad wingman who, accidentally or intentionally, does something to mess up their partner's day on the job. It can be used to refer to an officer who reports the minor infractions of their peers to brass, but that's sometimes an improper use. If officers find themselves doing things that they're not supposed to be doing, and those things are hurting people, or making said people's lives any worse than necessary, those offending officers are in fact the Blue Falcons. Some of the human members of Blue Line lore have had to report peace officers who came out of pocket. It's a very unpleasant experience even when the department has your back throughout the entire process. If you wear a badge for a living, don't ever be a Todd. Don't ever tolerate one either. The Knights of the institution are unambiguous stand-ins for peace officers. While their organization is explicitly stated to be corrupt beyond saving, on an individual level, the only truly villainous knights are Todd and the director. Some of the rank and file can be jerks, as we see in the locker room and when two knights confiscate Ballister's prosthetic arm, but that doesn't seem to be the norm. By the way, if there's some equivalent to the Americans with Disabilities Act in the kingdom, those two might be fired by the time they get back from lunch. What a waste on their part too, because I'm not aware of any department in reality that has the resources to give frontline officers a proper lunch break. But anyway, for most of the film, our stand-ins in Steel are either acting as comic relief or saving people when disaster strikes. They fire some shots clearly intended to kill when chasing an escaped prisoner who they believe is guilty of high treason. But they're far from trigger-happy, as seen when an accomplice to Regicide isn't fired upon when they have a clean shot. When combined with the explicit condemnation of the institution as being too corrupt to redeem, it drives home the idea that the problem is the system, not the people who work for it. I really appreciate that as someone who would bleed blue if I had any blood. I will let this channel's Chronicles videos, over time, serve as a refutation to the notion that law enforcement as we know it cannot serve the public trust effectively. A quick sidebar though, I don't know if the writers have hung around military folks or first responders, but some of these exchanges really do sound like G-rated versions of our banter and bickering.
It bit me.
Was it a sea otter or a river otter?
Are you kidding me? Does it even matter? It bit me.
Well, there's some significant anatomical differences between the two.
Well done, writers. Let's do one more character. The Queen has a small yet important role in the film. In the comic, the Queen is a king who doesn't really do much before he dies off screen. The film did a good job of making the Queen's death feel impactful despite her not making it to the title screen, because it's her decision to let Ballister become a knight in the first place. As an American, I abhor the concept of a monarchy. All heads of state should be elected by their citizen peers, and no one should be head of state for life. But from what little screen time she has, I think she was a good ruler. I may despise monarchies, but that doesn't mean that I have to hate this particular make-believe sovereign on a personal level. Besides, the film makes it pretty clear that it's not good to hate anyone, really. So let's get back to telling this film's story. Building up to the third act, Ballister and Ambrosius square off, and the seed is planted in the Golden Boy's head that the director just might be lying to him. Some action sequences happen, Todd does his awful police brutality thing that we just covered, and amid the chaos, Nimona saves a kid who was about to become collateral damage of Nimona's rampage. But Nimona saves her, and then the child points a sword at Nimona. I am ashamed to admit that my first thought when I saw Nimona's reaction to this was, welcome to being a cop. But that's the wrong reaction, which like Nimona's more brash impulses, comes from a place of hurt. I am speaking as Cobalt when I say this, but this also speaks for some of the humans on the Blue Line lore team. I have personally rescued people from suicide attempts, only for them to lash out at me. Sometimes they just hated me for the badge I wore, even though I'd saved their life, and other times they had something to say about me being a sentient machine. After all, we're not real people like you humans. Extrapolate whatever metaphor you want from that as it relates to the humans on the team. But Nimona experienced this, just like I did. Just like some real people who have no interest in working for public safety, yet have been scorned just for being who they were. Just for being different, for being Nimona.
Because once everyone sees you as a villain, that's what you are. They only see you one way, no matter how hard you try.
Rather than being dismissive of Nimona's plight, I acknowledge that I understand her perspective to some degree. And if there's anyone watching who likes this film and doesn't much care for law enforcement, I invite you to recognize that we might understand each other's pain more than it seems. Emotional pain, by the by, is in no short supply as the film rises to its climax.
I don't know what's scarier. The fact that everyone in this kingdom wants to run a sword through my heart. Or that sometimes I just want to let them.
The true great revelation of this tale is laid bare. Nimona is Glorth's monster. Kind of. They were friends once, but Nimona was demonized for being different. Glorth was frightened and rebuked Nimona.
Go back to the shadows from whence you came.
Neither Nimona nor Ballister handle this revelation well. Ballister is upset because the fabled foe of his kingdom was hiding in plain sight this whole time, and he takes his frustration out on his fiendish friend. Nimona is on the verge of losing it, and in response, Ballister puts a hand on his weapon's hilt. To play knight's advocate, he's still plenty restrained. He doesn't draw his Nimona-slaying sword. But implicitly telling his friend to back off while she's reliving thousand-year-old trauma is not what she needs right now. I also get that he as a fragile human would have reason to fear her after finding out who she is, so I can sympathize with Ballister in his erroneous response. But it's the wrong call, and what happens next is still on him to a fair degree. If Nimona's only friend, who we see in 1,000 years, thinks she's a monster, why not become one? Like I'll cover in Dragon Age 2 someday. You want blood magic? I'll give you blood magic. No, it's not okay, but I get it. Nimona repeats the onslaught that she probably went on an eon ago after Glorth banished her for existing as she is. The kingdom hates Ballister because they think he killed somebody. But the kingdom hates Nimona because she's Nimona. Now her whole world is hate. The world hates her for 1,000 years, so now she hates the world. Yet she still knows that's wrong, so she also hates herself. Nimona's tough, but she's not invincible. There's one common thread to all this hate, she concludes through her pain and fury. If, by the rules of the world she's suffered in for so long, there is no peace for her in life, might as well give this kingdom that's so obsessed with slaying monsters.
Go back to the shadows from whence you came.
Go back to the shadows from whence you came.
What they want. It is not Glorth's sword that finds her heart, but the hand of someone who cares for her. A hand that is a daily reminder of Ballister Boldheart's own loss. A hand that we, as United States peace officers, must never withhold from those who need it from us. Nimona is talked down from the ledge, and two friends reconcile for the whole kingdom to see. The shapeshifter's new friend makes amends with her, under the watchful gaze of her old friend, who never did. I know that the profession of law enforcement clings tightly to its traditions, some of which are fine traditions. But we must always strive to be better than the ones who wore the badge, or in this case the armor, before us. Ballister Boldheart succeeds in surpassing the very first knight in this regard. But there's still a monster yet to be slain this night. Choosing a tradition of prejudice and fear of the other over her sworn duty to her charges, the director blasts her own officers with a laser weapon and aims a huge cannon at an obviously de-escalated Nimona, with no regard for the human lives who will die with her if that ordnance fires. A wounded Ambrosius tries to stop her, but one of his partners pulls him away from the cannon. At least this unnamed knight can save one rookie, if not the citizens who will be caught in the blast. Enter Nimona, whose unique qualities make her the only one capable of stopping the director and saving the day. A flaming nimbus of righteous defiance, Nimona ascends to destroy the cannon. The director fires. When the dust settles, nothing's left of either of them. Nothing but ashes. It's Nimona's story, so she has to be right. And her actions save the day in this scenario. Not everyone with an anarchistic bent is necessarily misanthropic in nature. Nimona chooses to save the kingdom because even after 1,000 years of loneliness and 1,000 years of pain set upon her by civilization, she still cares about other people and does what she has to do when the real monster strikes. We as peace officers must always be willing to do the same, even through the hurt, even though you humans don't even live for 1,000 years.
But if you want a happily ever after, you can never let your guard down. Because the monsters are always out there.
This is unironically true, in the movie and in reality, but I find that one's monstrosity is measured by her actions, not her state of being or even her broad political ideology. The epilogue is good, and I'll leave it at that. Both versions, I mean. I like the ending of the graphic novel and the film for different reasons, and I strongly invite you to indulge in at least the movie if you only have time for one. But the comic is really good too, just know that it leans into the cruelty of the Institute and its officers much more heavily than the movie does. There is one really strong example therein of institutional malice enacted by a likely decent officer, and it's this one panel I'm showing right now. Not adapting this into the movie was a huge missed opportunity for the film's theme, and that matters to me, because I do want to reach out to some American police departments about their homeless outreach programs that seem to be having a positive impact on their respective communities. To finally wrap it up, the film is great. The late journalist Michael Brooks is famously paraphrased saying something to the effect of, "Be kind to people, be ruthless to institutions." Nimona the film executes this philosophy to perfection. It's thematically against law enforcement, but not peace officers for the most part, and that's a tough tightrope to walk. It's appropriate for anyone who can watch a PG movie, and again, I recommend it for the whole family without reservation. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for your time. If this presentation was enriching to you, I invite you to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and perhaps leave a comment below to discuss what I went over. As for me, I will be back to interviewing real-world first responders and company in the next video. Until we meet again. Bye.